If you know, you know. And if you know, you know. So anyone coming in, I just get right to it. Anyone coming in, I'm just going to preface by saying whether you're coming in late or you're coming in later, the thumbnail basically resembles to me a dragonfly face, you know, dragonfly in the face thumbnail. Now, I'm probably gonna speak in code. That's why basically it's if you know, you know. And I'm gonna make sure the entirety of this live stream is in code due to the fact that there is mounting viewership, which is a positive thing. However, a lot of these live streams, I don't know why, it just so happens to be that way because I'm speaking freely about whatever I want to speak about. And a lot of these topics are touchy topics. They tend to be the types of subject matter that people are sensitive about, you know? It's interesting because here in the US, it's like you would think this is like such a forward-minded, you know, open, liberal place. And when I say liberal, I don't mean like a political affiliation. I mean just like open. But it's actually not. You know, it's quite conservative in many ways. And again, I don't mean politically. And some of this subject matter is, when it comes down to it, is like I said, it's touchy. It's that people are, you know, they're funny with the way they respond to some of this stuff. And if you know, you know. So no, the thumbnail is not a dragonfly face, although it looks like it to me, anyways. You know, it's CS and double C. If you know, you know. And for the people in the know, especially when it comes to PE, when you use VEDs, most, and this is not just for men, surprisingly. A lot of people don't know that as well. It's for women as well. But women, you're going to have to do your own research, DYOR on that, because I'm in no position. I'm not qualified to be able to speak about that. Not that I'm so qualified in this neither, because a lot of this is bro science, you know, and anecdotal. So I'm just going to speak from experience. So whether, you know, an expert comes in and is like, well, no, that's not correct. Well, you know what? I'm speaking from experience, speaking about what I know, and that's where we take it. If anyone wants to chime in and bring in your own experiences, feel free. But when you use VEDs, your CS, for most men, you're going to experience gains over time. Now, when it comes to traction devices, that's where a lot of the hype goes. However, you know, using VEDs, it's one of those things where a lot of men experience, it's kind of like hit or miss. But the reason why I'm doing this live stream today, and I'm really focusing on VEDs, if you know, you know, is because I think a lot of men, and again, this is bro science and anecdotal, and from my own experience, when I do a comparison between like the most recent knowledge on traction and whether it's BFR, VEDs, if you know, you know, I do think we may want to look at VDs the way we look at traction. And the reason I say that is because a lot of men are doing like 15 minutes either once a day. Best case scenario, you're doing like 15, 20 minutes twice a day, right? Like once maybe when you wake up and then again before you go to sleep, right? And then, when it comes to edema, when it comes to, not pushing past a certain point, what I think we should be focusing on is being able to get longer sessions with higher intensity. In this case, we're talking about pressure, right? So in order to do that, you can't rush the process. So I'm not talking about blisters. I'm not talking about burst capillaries. I'm talking about, yeah, it's true. You don't want edema, right? So how do you do that but have longer sets with less fluid buildup? Well, you have to actually spend the time where you're in the cylinder and you are spending more time at a lower pressure, and then you have to build up. So the way I think like a beginner should start is you would go 3 inches of mercury, right? So if we're talking kPa, we're talking 10 kPa, right? If you know, you know. And then you do that as a warm-up set for like five minutes, right? And then you can let go for like 10 seconds or so, 10 to 30 seconds. And then you start your first working set, right? And then your first working set, and this is for a beginner. And I honestly think if you've been doing this for a while, it doesn't matter if you've been doing it for 1-2 years straight, right? And you haven't really gotten much, or if you plateaued, I think you should go back, start over, and start at what I just said. Warm up 5 minutes straight. No, not an interval. 5 minutes straight, where that's your warm up. 5 minutes at 3 inches of mercury. And that's the equivalent of about 10 kPa. I know that sounds like nothing. If you know, you know. But that's your warm up. And then you go into your first set, right? Your first set would be roughly 5 inches of mercury, which is the equivalent of about 16 kPa, right? So 16, 17 kPa is your first set, right? 5 minutes straight. No, not 30 seconds, not 1 minute, not 2 minutes, not 3 minutes. No, if you know, you know, and if you have some experience, then you know that pressure is low, right? Because we know what your actual natural equivalent pressure is, right? Which would be about 16, 17 kPa, or roughly 5 to 7 inches of mercury, right? So if that's the case, that's your first working set. Because remember, we're retraining, right? So that we get rid of edema. So the first set, we're going, first working set after the warm up, 5 minutes straight, 5 inches of mercury, which is 16 kPa. And then after you're done, take about a minute to where you just come out the cylinder, you shake off, you diamond jelk out as a stretch, real carefully, right? Because you know you're gonna be kind of filled at that point, right? Because of the warm-up set and the first working set, right? So diamond jelk stretch out, and then for about 1 or 2 minutes, and then you go into your second working set. Now, on your second working set, same thing. 5 inches of mercury, which is 16 kPa, and you do it for 10 minutes straight. Okay? After the 10 minutes straight, same thing. Shake out, diamond stretch out, you know. That's like your in between, right? To get, new flow. Third set. So now we have the initial 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20. This is the third set was 10 minutes. And then the last set, which would be the same thing. And I'll recap all of this, right? 5 inches of mercury, which is 16 kPa. And you do that for 5 minutes. Okay? So that's a total of 25 minutes. Your first was the warm-up, which was 3 inches of mercury, which is 10 kPa. That was the warm-up, 5 minutes. First working set is 5 inches of mercury, which is 16 kPa. 5 minutes is the first working set. Shake out. Well, you don't have to shake out and diamond jog stretch on each one, but on the first one, you can just kind of like, bring the pressure back down and then go right into the second set. The second set will be 10 minutes straight. 10 minutes straight on the second one, same pressure. And then after the 10 minutes, before you go into the final working set, so it's basically one warm-up set and 3 working sets, right? So 5 minutes on the first one, 10 minutes on the second one, and then back to 5 minutes on the third, right? Then you take 12 hours of rest, do whatever you do throughout the day, and then you repeat it again. 12 hours later for the same day, and you do the same exact thing. Do that for 2 weeks straight, and then you increase the time. Nothing else. The pressures are still the same. I know it's going to feel like nothing, but your EQ is going to go up. If you know, your EQ is going to go up. Your edema is going to go down, and you're retraining yourself to be able to handle this so that eventually, and I'll get to my point, right? It usually takes me about 10, 15 minutes before I get to my point anyways, right? But I'm putting this out there because there are men that could really benefit from this, especially men that have experience, right? So do this twice a day. After 2 weeks, then you increase the time. So yeah, you'll still do the first warm-up set, and then the 3 working sets, instead of going to a 5 minute, 10 minute, and then 5 minute, go to a 10 minute, and then a 10 minute, and then down to a 5 minute, right? So in total, do all of this for at least 1 to 2 months before gauge it yourself, see how it feels. And then let's say after a month, right before the month is over, you should get it to where you're doing the 1 warm-up set at 5 minutes, and then the second, which is the first working set, second working set, and third working set, it should be probably 10, 10, and 10. So that's a total of 35 minutes, right? And you want to do that twice a day. So after you do that for at least a good month, you should notice your EQ is up, if you know, and your edema is down. You have retrained yourself. So now you're ready because you've gradually increased the time to where you're doing 2 sessions of 35 minutes total time per day, right? So that's over an hour per day. Now, here's the thing, and this is the comparison to like traction. Because when it comes to traction, yeah, you'll have guys that like do, a minimum of 30 minutes. I don't think that's enough. But there are also guys, especially from the old school, that do, whether it's with weight hanging or we're talking about extending, right? And they'll do well over an hour, over 2 hours. Some guys do 3-4 hours if you have the time, right? So now we're talking about, okay, if you're doing 3 or 4 hours on traction, why are you only doing 15 to 20 minutes on VEDs? It doesn't make sense. So I think and again, this is anecdotal and this is bro science, but I think guys are not getting results because they are not putting the time in for VDs like they are doing with traction. So eventually, you want to retrain yourself to where you can handle 2 hours a day, total time per day, split up in 2 sessions, where you want to do a good hour session for one, and then another hour session 12 hours later. I'm talking about just VD. You do traction, that's separate, right? So this is a lot of time. But if you're going to do VDs, you should be doing, in my opinion, an hour session and then another hour session. And your pressure should be high. I just took you through what I think is the way to build up your body's conditioning to where you can handle higher pressures to be able to do 2 hours of VD time split in 2 sessions, 12 hours of time in between, to where you can handle higher pressures, right? So you got to prevent yourself from rushing this process and be able to make sure you go for low pressures, which you think is like too low. And it may be, but in order to be able to handle higher pressures without the edema and go 2 hours and hold for longer times with high pressure and have no edema and still have high EQ, you have to be able to do that. So, in my opinion, work the time first and then slowly work the pressure up. I mean slow. So in the second month, if you feel good after doing a 35-minute session and then wait 12 hours and do another 35-minute session, then you increase the pressure. I would say when we're talking about increasing pressure, we would go from, okay, so the warm-up, instead of doing the 3 inches of mercury, which is 10 kPa, you would then experiment and try 5 inches of mercury, which is 16 kPa, on your warm-up set, right? And then your first working set eventually would get to around 8 inches of mercury, right? And now you're talking about maybe 26 or so kPa, right? So that's considerably higher, right? Eventually you want to get to where you're going like sets of 10, 12, upwards of maybe close to 15, right? So, and those are high numbers. We're talking about kPa, that's like 33, 34 on the 10. 12 would be like, we're talking about 38, 39, 40 kPa, and 15 would be like 45, 46 kPa. These are high numbers, right? So in order to do that and actually hold it for 5, 10 minutes straight without edema and still have high EQ, think about it. Think about that. If you can hold, let's just say 15 inches of mercury, which is upwards of like 45 to 50 kPa or more, and you can hold that for 10 minutes straight, just think about that. If you know, and if you have experience here, you would know, let's just say 50 kPa or like 15 inches of mercury, and you hold it for 10 minutes straight, and your EQ is still high, your edema is low, and you can still see the vascularity, think about what that should do over time. Again, bro science, if you know, this is anecdotal, but comparatively speaking to traction, it only makes sense that if you compare that then to the majority of men that are only doing like 8, 9, 10 inches of mercury, and hey, love, what's going on? And, you know, compared to like either the weight that they're hanging or the tension that they're using on extending, they're doing a lot more on traction. So it only makes sense that they may, you know, depending, they may be getting more results that way than circumference-wise. Because there's a major difference in how much is actually being done, you know? So that's what I wanted to really touch on today. I wanted to come in and talk about that because I think circumferential, I don't know if that's a word, but if we're speaking about, you know, three-dimensionally speaking, volume-wise is a lot more, right? And they always talk about this. They always say, well, you know, it's the, you know, the total volume because of, you know, the 3D. And I'm speaking in code because you already know. If you know, you know. I'm speaking in code. So when we're talking about total volume, that way, outward, we probably will get a lot more, right? Again, we're talking about volume. So yeah, I'm not saying guys should stop with traction. No, if anything, you should do both, right? But there's a, like, chances are when you do traction, you're only going to get gains mostly one way, right? Or you would have to get crazy gains before you see anything else any other way, but you're probably only going to get gains one way. Whereas when it comes to VDs, you could quite honestly get gains both ways. Even though people say it's also just one way, you know, three-dimensionally speaking, volume-wise, that way. I'm speaking in code, you know. But I think VDs give you more bang for buck. And to me, it does, like, I'm not in the camp of, okay, we talking about air, we talking about water. To me, it's more practical to use air. So that's one of those things. But I'm thinking more along the lines of air, right? But I think more bang for buck. Again, I broke all of this down. I think men have to retrain themselves to be able to hold for longer periods of times with higher pressure and have their edema in check and have their EQ really high to be able to actually get what they're after in this over time. And I think a lot of men are missing out on that, and they're not getting it because they're not doing that. So that's really the point here. And as usual, I appreciate anyone checking in. Anyone who comes in later on and sees this, you know, I pretty much did my best to speak this whole thing in code. Because like I said, viewership and anything of the likes, subscribers, all that is kind of mounting. So, you know, all eyes on me in this. So I had to speak to in this case, the fellas that are in the know and have experience, you know, because they're, like I said, this applies to women too, but you have to do your own research, you know, because again, I'm not qualified. I'm not qualified in any of this. Again, this is bro science. This is anecdotal, but I'm speaking from experience. And again, if you know, you know. And go back into this live stream if you missed it. And if this pertains to you and it's something that could help you and spark some ideas, you can feel free to comment, ask questions, and, perhaps I'll do a part 2 to this. But if you're experienced and this is part of your regimen, then you should probably take heed to this live, pay attention to what I said, and possibly retrain yourself to handle pressures for longer periods of times until you get to where you can do high pressures for long periods of time. Because you're always going to hear you're going to have this like crazy looking edema if you go any longer than 30 seconds. The thing about it is you have to train yourself to be able to handle, and you can't rush that, because much like with traction and weight, it's easy to go up in weight quickly, but that's not what you want to do. And it's not because of, steel cord and then eventually like you stiffened it and then now you're getting no results. Well, in a way, it's kind of similar, like to steel cord, and then you can't get beyond what you've stiffened. Similarly, it's like if you have a high edema response in your system, you have to train yourself to go slow, almost like lightweight in traction, before you go up, So with a VD, you go really light on pressure, and then you increase time slowly. And that's how you do it until you get to a place where you can actually handle something upwards of 10 to 15 inches of mercury for 5 to 10 minutes straight. So think about what that actually does. On an extreme high, if you go 15 inches of mercury and you hold it for 10 minutes straight or even longer, and you get no edema, and it's not because you have no response. No, you trained yourself for that. You have no edema, your vascularity is great, and your EQ is all the way up, and you can handle 15 inches of mercury for 10, 15 minutes straight. Think about what that does. I know most people can't think about that because most people can't even fathom doing that, right? It's like a guy, chances are you're not going to see, and I know these two things don't correlate, but I'm just saying, right? Just think, like, chances are you're not going to see a scrawny, skinny dude, or it's going to be very rare, who can bench press 315 for 15 reps, right? No, his body has got to be conditioned to be able to do that. Yeah, you might see pound for pound a really slim looking person, like an Anatoly type, who can actually, even though he's very muscular, under the clothes he wears, like, he's got conditioned muscles, right? To be able to handle heavy weight like a power lifter. So I know it's not the same, but because one is skeletal and one is smooth, and I'm speaking in codes, if you know, you know, but the reality is you have to condition yourself to be able to do this. And if you condition yourself properly, just think about what 15 minutes of 15 inches of mercury is going to do to you. And I hope this sparks ideas for some of the vets or some of the people who've been doing this for a while, or some of the people who are in the know, and practice this on a regular basis in their regimen. So that's really it. I'm almost a half hour in. I broke this whole thing down with, the dragonfly face in the thumbnail. The whole thing was in code. If you know, you know. And I appreciate anyone who checked in. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free. And I will read them. And if need be, I'll do a part 2 to this. and we'll continue again. But I thought this was important to speak about, and I did. I broke the whole thing down, and yeah, that's really it, you know? So until next time, if you missed it, go back and see if it's something that can help you and if it's relevant to you. Okay? Take care.